Just a beautiful thing going on here in 970 BC. King David of Israel turned to his leadership team and he said this, "My son Solomon," verse 1, "whom God has clearly chosen to be the next king of Israel, he's still young and inexperienced. And the work ahead of him is enormous. For the temple he's going to build is not for mere mortals, but it is for God himself. And now, because of my devotion to the temple of my God, David, Solomon's father, said, I am giving all of my own private treasures of gold and silver to help in the construction of the temple. This is in addition to the building materials I've already collected." And down to verse 5, "Who will follow my example and give offerings to the Lord today?" Generosity is a quality of your character. Where is your character when it comes to generosity? You see, there's a difference in an act of generosity and being a generous person. That's why someone can do something for someone else and we go, "Oh, that was a generous act," because we know that's not a generous person, right? It was just an act of generosity. But the character of generosity is what flows out of our lives when we are consistently looking to the people that we care about and doing things to help their lives and accent their lives because we live in a character of generosity. Or like for David here, it is a cause that is very important to him, where his priorities are for the people of Israel and the work of God that he was calling him and his son Solomon to do through the people of Israel and building the temple. This was so important to him that the character of generosity is shown in giving all of his private treasures to the construction of the temple in 1 Chronicles 29, 1 through 5, because he recognized the crucial role that God was asking him to do was going to be the spiritual hub of Israel, and he knew that he wanted to personally be a part of investing in what God was doing there, and he wanted to show his deep love for the work of God that was the highest of priorities in his life. He wanted to pass it on to future generations, the love that he had for what God was doing through the people of Israel in the building of the temple and making it their spiritual hub. He wanted to pass that on to the next generation, and this offering inspired others to match his enthusiasm. Look at verses 6. We're going to look at verse 6 and verse 9. It says, "The family leaders, the leaders of the tribes of Israel, the generals, the captains of the army, and the king's administrative officers gave willingly. The people rejoiced over the offerings they had," verse 9, "for they had been given freely and wholeheartedly to the Lord." This is a character of generosity. This is an attitude of joy. This is an attitude of celebration to God. And it says, "And King David was filled with joy," that the generosity that he had for the work of God was being contagious to the people around them, and in their reaction, his heart was filled with joy. Generosity is contagious. His generosity sparked a chain reaction of offering his things and then seeing it sweep like a wave through the entire community. And then we get this beautiful prayer here in 29 verses 10 through 17. After his generosity was contagious, it says, "Then David praised the Lord in the presence of the whole assembly," and it quotes, and I quote, "Everything in the heavens and on earth is yours." Now listen to how he explains this in his prayer. "Everything is yours, O Lord, and this is your kingdom," the kingdom of Israel. It's your kingdom. Who am I? And who are my people that they would give anything to you? Everything we have has come from you, and we give you only what you have given us first. We can give nothing to the work of God. We can give nothing in generosity to people. There's nothing you can give that isn't already God's, that he's allowed you to be a steward of, that whatever you give, it was God's. It was God's to begin with. He's entrusted it to you. And that's why, although generosity is contagious for the believer and the non-believer. Generosity is a character quality that many non-Christians have, and it's beautiful to be around, and it's so contagious to be around non-believers who have a generous spirit for the things and the people and the causes that they love. But stewardship is a belief. Stewardship is a change in the way that we think. Stewardship is understanding that everything we have, the ability we have to go to work, comes from God. The ability that we have to receive increase in our life from wherever we get it is because God is blessing our life. And as believers, our belief change and stewardship is a belief. And David's prayer of praise, this recognition is made clear as he acknowledges he can't give anything back to God that God hasn't already given him. And this realization transforms acts of generosity, of giving to the work of God. This understanding of stewardship transforms it completely into a humble act of stewardship before God. Verse 15. We are here for only a moment. In his prayer, he says to God, visitors and strangers in the land as our ancestors were before us. Our days on earth are like a passing shadow, gone without a trace. He's putting stewardship of God's thing in context of our short lives, passing quickly, underscoring the importance of whatever financial blessing comes into your life that is going to pass quickly. The most significant thing you can do is generosity for the work that God is doing. Our Lord, our God, he continues, even this material we have gathered to build your temple, to honor your holy name, comes from you. It all belongs to you. I know, my God, that you examine our hearts and rejoice when you find integrity there. You know that I've done all these things with good motives, and I have watched your people offer their gifts willingly and joyously. Man, that is beautiful. By seeing the contagiousness of the generosity and these contributions as a part of God's larger divine plan, David and his people adopt a view of stewardship that reaches beyond the lives of Israel. And verse 21 continues to tell us that the next day, his son, young and inexperienced. We don't think of Solomon that way, do we? We think of Solomon after reading Proverbs and reading Ecclesiastes, and we picture this old man with a long beard and all of this experience and wisdom. No, at this point, he is young and he is inexperienced, and the very next day, he became a beneficiary of the character of the generosity of his father, David. Solomon witnessed his father's deep commitment to the cause of God. He witnessed his father's deep commitment of his own personal possessions to the work that God was doing in this world. And Solomon became the recipient of his father's generosity, and all of this generosity of David. He was not going to be the one to ever receive the credit for building the temple. It was going to be his son Solomon. His generosity becomes generational in the book of Chronicles and into 2 Chronicles. David's generosity for his family becomes generational. When Solomon begins his reign, it's passed on through him. Under Solomon's leadership, the son of David, the temple was built, symbolizing the peak of the spiritual hunger that was in Israel, and Solomon got to be a part of that, and he was only able to accomplish it because of the generous character of his father and the generation of his fathers that came before him, and that generosity was passed down for his benefit and the benefit of his peers. That is awesome when generational generosity impacts the lives of the next generation. The temple's built, and Solomon's contributions, his ability to motivate the people to get this work of God done, culminates in his generosity in 2 Chronicles chapters 5 through 7, where he displays himself financial generosity and this spirit of including all of the people, even those who are not being generous towards the work of God, includes all of the people in the celebration of the multi-generational generosity that made it happen. It presents this legacy of faith in God, this legacy of leadership and generosity, this community spirit. and it's profoundly influencing everyone who sees it going on. It is changing lives. It's powerfully illustrating for us literally the hundreds and thousands upon thousands of people who were blessed because of the generational generosity of David and all who were in his generation working towards the work of God, to where Solomon and his generation were the recipients of that, and then they continued that generational generosity. In the early hours of February 4th, 1976, the earth beneath Guatemala trembled with a 7.5 magnitude earthquake that just left a total swath of devastation, flattening buildings in the city and villages around the country that were never built or designed to stand this kind of force. 22,000 people died in this earthquake, and 126,000 more were injured. And among the most brutal hit were the indigenous villages in the mountains where the destruction was nearly complete. Stick and adobe and block homes just completely crumbled into rubble. People lost their lives. People were injured. And the rock and the mud roads that serviced throughout the mountains into these villages crumbled and were now choked veins of the earth. And they were blocked and they were unyielding, leaving the people on the mountainside villages in desperate need of evacuation and unable to evacuate themselves. And into the chaos of all of this in the mountains drove Manuel Solis, a man who his own circumstances were humble. In the mid-70s, he was living from week to week financially, but he was driven by a character of generosity and compassion for his fellow Guatemalans. Manuel knew the crumbled roads very well, although they were clogged arteries of escape. He knew the roads well. He had a character of generosity, and he combined his knowledge of the roads and his character of generosity, and he turned those destroyed roads into a lifeline of evacuation for many of the people. In his tiny old Subaru micro van, it was far from ideal to rescue these people from the devastation they had experienced, but it was going to have to suffice combined with his generosity. And Manuel brought hope with every trip into the mountains, hauling stranded villagers to safety and returning with supplies and hauling more villagers to safely. For weeks, the rhythm of evacuating people in desperation consumed Manuel's life. But each trip that he come back out of those mountains with people were new stories of resilience. New stories of gratitude from the own generosity that they were living there in those mountains. And these new stories only fueled his resolve, his generosity, his character. It was the fuel that kept him going week after week. And many people, knowing the hum of his tiny micro Subaru van approaching, they would often gather, helping to load a few remaining possessions that they had and their loved ones, and he would take them out of those villages. Manuel's selfless act offered immediate relief, and his character of generosity helped those in those communities endure, even in the middle of facing overwhelming disaster. He also believed in stewardship on the next slide. Manuel Solis just didn't have a character of generosity like many unbelieving people do. He also had a belief in stewardship, that everything he owned and living financially from week to week, but even this old micro Subaru van that he had, even that belonged to God. And for his entire adult life, he always gave his meager tithe to the work of God through his local church, and then used everything else he had to be a blessing to the people around him for the cause of Christ and the people that he cared about. That is generosity and character combined with a belief in stewardship, and it changes generations. His generosity was contagious. Today, people still tell his daughter Damaris, who is on the screen up there, how her dad helped many people after the earthquake. And that's what makes generosity generational. In the 90s, in the 2000s, in the teens, even to this day, she will come across people who will tell her stories of her dad's generosity combined with stewardship for the work of God and all that he had. What makes it generational? His daughter, who you see on the screen, has also been a faithful steward of her income since she was 7 years old. As a very under-resourced little 7-year-old girl, her grandmother would give her a little bit of quetzales, and she would take that and she would tithe on what her grandmother gave her at 7 years old because it was new increase to her life. And she wanted to believe in stewardship, not just be generous, but believe in stewardship, and she tithed on it. Another thing about my friend on the screen is she has personally served now in at least 7 natural disasters directly and personally in Guatemala: earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, mudslides. Literally tens of thousands of people negatively affected through these events. And like her father, she has served in each and every one of them, directly providing support to people. Not only does she have generous character, but she has the belief and stewardship that everything she has, even her skill sets, belong to God, and she wants to use them for the cause of God and for the people that she loves in her country. She's also the one who facilitates New Start's compassionate ministry work in Guatemala. Her dad's generosity became generational with her. It continues through her daughters. In my WhatsApp, I got a conversation with her this week that her teenage daughter had run into some financial trouble and needed some work to be done on her car, and they had a long conversation about if she was going to give her tithe or put that money towards the work on her car, and she made the decision, like her grandfather and like her mother, she wanted stewardship to be a belief that is reflective of her belief in God, in her character of generosity, and she gave that to the work of her local church and figured out another way to get her car fixed. How many of you last week walked out on your porches to see the northern lights? How many of you? How many of you were sorely disappointed with what you saw? With your naked eye. What you looked up and saw with your naked eye, many of you looked up excited to see the northern lights, but what you saw was just a barely visible pink or purple haze in the sky, in the dark sky, and you thought, well, I could have been in bed. And then you woke up the following morning to look at your neighbor's pictures on social media, and you're like, wow, they got a great view tonight. I should go to their house and see what it is that they're seeing. And pictures were all over social media of these beautiful skies over Ohio. And you thought to yourself, I didn't see that. Well, you know what? For the most part, they didn't either. Their phone had a 3-second long exposure feature on it to where they would look at it and see the same pink or purple haze that you saw, hold their phone up, snap the picture, it would expose over 3 seconds, gathering all the light that is actually there. Your naked eye just isn't able to catch it at those wavelengths, but the 3-second exposure on the camera can, and it gathers all of that light that the camera actually sees and combines it together, and you go, wow, that really was there. The northern lights really were over Ohio. It really was beautiful. My favorite thing that happened the whole week is I saw Tanner Jessup posted all the pictures of the northern sky from his house, and he's like, wow. And he got like 100 comments on it, and probably 80 of the people had no clue that there are pictures like this one right here. You know, there's a lake on one, mountains in the other. He just got online and cropped a bunch of pictures and put them on there. And you guys are probably thinking, you missed out. I got to run up to Tanner and Christie's in order to see the northern lights. I laughed for 2 days at how fantastic that was. I stayed in bed. I didn't get up one night to go see the Northern Lights because I knew what I just told you, and I actually slept several miles out in a sleeping bag by myself on the Valdez Glacier watching the Northern Lights all night dance underneath my head, and I knew what it was going to look like in Ohio. And you see, the Northern Lights, when you were here in Ohio, they were there, but you needed the right equipment to capture their beauty. So if you stayed in your house, you would have no clue how spectacular the Northern Lights can be. If you stepped outside and looked up with just your naked eyes, you might have noticed the hint of their presence, noticed that something is there that wasn't there before, but it wasn't that impressive. However, if you ventured to an area with a little less light pollution and you equipped yourself with a long exposure camera, then when you looked at your photos, you could enjoy the full experience of the Northern Lights that were right there over Ohio, and it's absolutely fantastic. That's exactly how generational generosity works for each and every one of us sitting here this morning. Hearing about your grandparents' stewardship of God's resources on the next slide and their generosity to others is like staying in bed during the Northern Lights. If the children of David or the children of Solomon just listened to stories about their grandfather David's generosity, and that's all it was, it's like they would know that the generosity was there, but they've only heard about it through their grandparents' lives. And then you begin observing the generosity of your parents on the next slide. It's similar to viewing the sky from your front porch. You go out to the front porch. Do I have a next slide up there? Mama? They're on it. Okay. It's because that's a cue for the band to come up. Then observing your parents' generosity, your grandparents' generosity, you hear about it, and it's like, whatever. But then you actually get to see your parents live out generosity, your parents that may have believed in the belief of stewardship. And it's similar to seeing that from your front porch and seeing the Northern Lights from your front porch when the true impact of their stewardship might not always have been visible to you. Your parents are being generous, and you see that pink and purple haze of generosity, but you don't fully get to see the great impact like Damaris with her father. Just hearing about it years later, you just see the colored haze of the sky. But if you actively engage in the character of generosity and you actively engage in the belief of stewardship of God's work and showing generosity to others, that's like going to Tromsø, Norway to see the Northern Lights. Situated in the heart of the Aurora Zone in the Norwegian Arctic, Tromsø is among one of the best places in the world without a camera to just sit there and look up at the Northern Lights. Seeing the Northern Lights from Tromsø is like absolutely nothing else. The sky lights up with vibrant colors that move like they're dancing just for you, and you can watch them wave and dance as curtains of light. It's that same overwhelming sense of beauty and awe when you think about David's prayer on stewardship and generosity. Just like those bright colors in the dark sky, his words are shedding light on us, but they do not have a vivid impact on our lives until we actually participate in it ourselves. When it comes to generosity and the belief in stewardship, I 100% guarantee you that some of you are sitting right now and you have heard stories of your grandparents' generosity. You've heard stories of your grandparents' belief in stewardship, and you love them for it, and you're grateful for it, but you're not into it. It's not for you. It's like you're in Tromsø, Norway, and stay in the hotel room with the curtains drawn and having them just sit there and tell you about it. from inside the room when all you got to do is step outside to participate in it. Others of you may have had parents that you actually saw them take their financial stuff, take their money, take their check, take their cash, take their tithe, and actually put it in the offering plate. And you stood in the row of a church year after year after year watching them do that, and you thought, man, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. I could have those shoes if they just wouldn't put that in there. I could have that game system if they wouldn't put that in there. And your parents are like, oh, no, all this stuff, even that game system, that all belongs to God. Yeah, we're just here for a brief period of time. We get to be a part of this. Some of you are sitting on savings accounts and retirement accounts and 401ks that have been built on the act of not being generous. And you feel good about what's in that account, but right now you're sitting in a hotel room with the curtains drawn and the door shut. In Tromsø, Norway, you're sitting right there, and all of the beauty of experiencing generosity as an actual character quality in your own life and stewardship as a belief, you're missing out on every single second of it. So I have two questions for you to close with this morning. One, if the people who come before you were generous in character and believed in stewardship, you get to decide today at 11:06 a.m. on May 19th, 2024, are you going to reject the generosity? See, generosity isn't just being nice to people. That doesn't help a cause. That doesn't help someone in need when you're just nice to them. That's being nice. That's not generosity. When you're financially generous, stuff leaves your account and goes to the work that God is doing in this world that you have been a recipient of, because those who have come before you to bless those who will come after you. So that's the first question. If you've got to witness it yourself, and you scrape out a random offering here or there, you scrape out a generous act for a neighbor. Oh, you do generous acts. I helped them move their fridge. That was a generous act. But you're not a generous person at heart. We want to help you develop that character. We want to help you develop that belief in stewardship, and you get to decide today. Now it's 11:07. What have you decided? What have you decided? Are you going to continue that beauty that you've heard in these three stories this morning? My second question is this in our family series. Many of us come from a family that was not generous, that their highest values was your bank statement. I had a friend here, Tom Fritz, who's come New Start, was a high exec up at Micro Center. And he told me a story one time that when he started an executive position at Micro Center, the person's not there anymore, but one of the key VPs or owners or something like that, every week would print off his bank statement, his bank balance, and bring it in and show everybody to say, look at me, look at me. And so much of what this church has and possesses and is able to use for ministry is because the years that Tom Fritz was here and just gave and gave and gave and gave and gave. And you've been a recipient of a guy's generosity who stood in a room every week from the person who gave him his income saying, no, it's about the bank statement. It's about the savings account. It's about, some of you were raised by family like that. My question for you is this: are you going to start that for the following generations today? Are you going to start for your family who has never, maybe some of them were generous, but they didn't have the belief in stewardship that everything belongs to God? This is an attitude and belief change for my life. Are you going to start it today at 11:08 this morning? Let's stand.